This is Gerardo Del Real with the Outsider Club from the Beaver Creek Precious Metals Summit. I have the pleasure of speaking with the CEO of Midas Gold, Mr. Stephen Quinn, the CEO of Revival Gold, Mr. Hugh Agro, and the CEO of Otis Gold, Mr. Craig Lindsay. Amongst the three of them, there's about 10 million ounces of gold in an environment where mid-tiers and majors are desperate to replenish those reserves. So I want to start, gentlemen, by talking about the fact that all three of your companies are based out of Idaho. And Idaho is emerging as one of the best jurisdictions in the world at a time where fund managers, private equity, and even retail shareholders are really looking for safe jurisdictions. So I'd love to start by getting your take on the environment in Idaho. And then let's talk a little bit about the sentiment here at the conference. We know it's a tough market for juniors, but it's busy. It's busy.
Sure. So I can talk about Idaho. We've been working there since 2009 as a private company, 2011 as a public company, and it's been a very positive experience. The state has gone out of its way to be as helpful as possible to talk about its support for the industry. It's taken action. It's done things. We had a joint resolution by both houses of the state legislature, where 104 out of 105 state representatives and senators voted on a resolution to send to the President of the United States saying we support this project. And I think that's a pretty outstanding reflection of the support the state has, because it was co-sponsored by the leadership of both houses in both parties. So bipartisan support, and but in this day and age, it just shows that there's a broad-based support for the industry.
Midas has really been a leader on that front. How did you approach the community relations aspect? Because that's been critical to the support that you've received, and frankly, it's led the way for a lot of other companies in Idaho.
Yeah, sure. It's been a process of saying what we're going to do, but then doing it and showing that we're doing it. So we set out right at the beginning, very early on, very open disclosure, open book on visiting the properties. We invited NGOs the very first year we started working, come up and see what we're doing. And they're like, well, should we set up an appointment? No, just show up whenever you want. We got nothing to hide. We don't care if you come on Monday or Friday or Sunday. We're doing the same thing every day. And, we take about 500 local residents per year up to site. We organize tours. People can just sign up whenever they want. We get individual groups. We get families. We just had a family up there just last week where the whole extended family were on holiday, and they signed up and they came up. And we just go around and show them the site, explain the history of the site, and what our plans are, how we're going to manage it. And, we see, obviously there's a whole spectrum of people, but we've definitely seen people who naturally would be opposed to mining as an industry who come away from the site and say, well, now I understand the site, now I've seen it, I'm a supporter of the project. And I think it's that, open book disclosure, explaining to people, doing the right thing, not just saying it, that really kind of builds that credibility. And it's a long-term process. We've been at this, as I say, since 2009. We're almost 9 years into that process of building that credibility. It doesn't come overnight.
Hugh, Revival Gold. You picked Idaho, and I know that your network of contacts is quite deep. Why did you decide to have your flagship, the Bear Track Gold Project, in Idaho?
Yeah, so picking up on the comment that Steve just made, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a rich history of mining and exploration in the state of Idaho, and it's interesting to me that the state was one of the last states of the lower 48 to have been populated by European settlers of early 1800s. In fact, Lewis and Clark came across the Lemhi Pass not far from the Bear Track project in about 1806. Gold was discovered in 1860s in placer situations, and from there it's grown a deep culture in mining in Idaho. So really an obvious place for a company like ours to come and establish itself in the United States. Strong culture in mining, great geology, and again, as Steve pointed out, a supportive government. Both state and federally. And, Steve and the Midas crew have really led the way for this resurgence in Idaho of exploration and mining activity. Really, we take our hats off to the Midas crew for the good leadership they've set for the rest of us.
Excellent. Craig, you've been in Idaho for quite a bit now.
Yes, we've been out in Idaho since 2008, actually. And frankly, we've been riding on the coattails of some of the excellent work that Steve and his group at Midas have been doing. One of the neat things about Idaho is the really strong support that we're getting from the state. The governor, Butch Otter, has been very, very strongly supportive of mining in the state. It's the #5 industry in the state. The state is rising in the Fraser Institute mining rankings. And all of this is starting to be reflected in the permitting regime, specifically at our project in Idaho called the Kilgore Project. When we first picked it up in 2008, a lot of people said, gee, if that project was in the middle of Nevada, that would have been in production already. Because Idaho had kind of, people were a little bit indifferent to the permitting regime, but that has definitely changed. Our permitting authority at Kilgore is the U.S. Forest Service. And a little story, in 2012, when I last went through the permitting for something called a plan of operation, it actually took 2.5 years. I just recently permitted a much larger exploration plan at Kilgore, and it took 10 months. And the U.S. Forest Service committed to a timeline, and they met it almost to the day. So Idaho as a permitting regime is, that story alone is a very good reflection on the support and the energy around mining in the state right now.
It hasn't gone unnoticed. I don't think it's a coincidence that each of you have pretty significant strategic partners in your projects. I'd love to start with you, Stephen, for you to talk a bit about those partners and some of the names that have invested in Midas Gold and the project there.
Sure. I mean, we've as you know, it's been a challenging market almost since we IPO'd in 2011. And so you've really had to look for investors that have a long-term viewpoint, as opposed to traders looking to make a quick flip, because these projects take time to develop, they take time to permit, and so on. And so we've had some good core institutional investors that have supported the company, but critical to our being able to raise the fund in advance has been big strategic placements. So we've had Tech bought 9.9% of the company back about 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago. Franco-Nevada bought the earliest stage royalty deal that they'd ever done on a standalone project in the same year. Subsequently, in 2016, Paulson put in $25 million US, and then just in May this year, Barrett put in $38 million US. And it's the endorsement of people who are knowledgeable about the industry, but who also have that long-term viewpoint, is that value is not created overnight in a trade. It's created by investing and looking at the long-term value accretion over time. And so that's been critical to our ability to move the project forward, to access that capital. And I obviously appreciate the support of those large-scale players that have come into the equation.
Hugh, you've also attracted some of the smartest, quote-unquote, money in the business. Can you talk a bit about the project and about some of your strategic partners?
Yeah, I thank you. So Orion Mine Finance, who've been very active in the sector, backed us early on with the Bear Track project. And I think what they saw in our team was the technical expertise, the local knowledge and insight on our team, and with respect to this project, that they took great comfort in coming on board. Now we're just getting started. We're 1.5 years into this. We've already got 2 million ounces in the resource category, about 2/3 of that in the indicated, and another 1/3 in the inferred. We're building on that. We see quite a bit of potential in the geology here. This hasn't been looked at since the 1990s in any real discernible way. We've got a lot of work going on in terms of geophysics, structural geology, updated metallurgical test work. And what we're seeing is a very large gold system. Over 3.5 million ounces of gold have been produced and or discovered in the Bear Track Arnett area to date. That makes for interesting geology, and when you've got a conduit as large and as prospective as the Panther Creek Fault, which is the source of the mineralization so far as we know it at Bear Track, an orogenic gold system, one that is deep and that is over such extent, you get pretty excited about that, and so too are our shareholders, Ryan being one of them, very smart investor in the sector.
Excellent. Craig, you've navigated what feels like 2 or 3 bear markets over the last decade, right?
Yeah, it has been a real challenge, and we're certainly the last 3 to 5 years have been a really difficult place for guys like me to operate in. There's very little retail capital. Institutional capital has really dried up. So the big story in our sector has been strategic investors, and we've certainly, along with Revival and Midas, have benefited from that. Specifically, Agnico Eagle Mines bought 9.9% of our company about 18 months ago. And their rationale was really a couple of things. They like the 100% ownership that we have in our project. It's royalty free. Probably most importantly, they see district scale potential out there. We're sitting right on the margin of something called the Kilgore Caldera. The Kilgore Caldera is significantly larger than the Yellowstone caldera, sitting under a massive hydrothermal system. It's created a very good and favorable environment for gold deposits. And we are sitting on about a 950,000 ounce gold resource today. But what really excites them is the regional potential. And so since they got involved, they've really encouraged us strongly to go out, get out of our comfort zone, move beyond our deposit, and start demonstrating the growth potential out there. And we've done that through everything from mag surveys to soil surveys to, we've been, if you can believe it, we've been sluicing for gold in the creeks outside of our project boundaries, which has allowed us we've found gold discoveries outside of our project boundary, so we expanded our project, and that's the kind of work that a strategic like Agnico gets excited about and supports. So that's really why they're involved, and frankly, they're looking for projects in the Western U.S. That's kind of a hole in their portfolio, if I could use that term. So that's another reason for them to be looking in Idaho. And they certainly, and it's probably fair to say, historically, I think we talked a little bit about it before, but Idaho has been out of favor historically. There's been very little greenfield exploration done in the state, yet it is highly prospective for gold. And you're now seeing a lot of these strategic investors come in and start putting money into the state. And it's a really, even in a very challenging market, it's exciting for guys like us to have that kind of support and to see companies like Agnico, Orion, Barrick, Teck support that vision that we have.
If I could just add a point, having been with a major in the past and been in the shoes of the majors, doing deals with the likes of Midas and Otis and Revival Gold, I can tell you, there's a lot of expertise that's brought to bear when making those investments. It's not just a geological decision; it's a permitting decision, it's a metallurgical decision, it's a team, it's a staffing and talent decision. And so when you've got companies like Barrick and Agnico making investments in these companies, it's not just a bunch of geologists coming up to the site and saying, well, we like the prospectivity here. It's guys thinking about all these questions that investors have to ask themselves about the prospectivity, actually mining and delivering gold and ultimately profits for these from these projects. And I think that's a great stamp of approval to see those teams have taken this kind of action on these companies. Agreed.
Craig, you mentioned the challenging market. Despite that, this conference seems to be pretty well attended. Thoughts on the conference?
Well, I think the average exploration guy is optimism is in our DNA, and we're often attending these events, and the three of us sit around and we get excited about each other's projects, and there's often no one else to talk to about this. That, at this conference here at Beaver Creek, one of the things that is a bit of a change from prior years is the fact that I've doing 44 one-on-one meetings in 2.5 days, and I'm seeing more corporates on this trip than I've ever seen. So, and we're talking about folks that are guys in Australia, people who have assets outside of Canada and the United States who are looking at the Western U.S. where we are. It's a bit of a change, and it's really refreshing for us because that, again, as we've talked about, it's a big source of capital. And we are seeing some more excitement, I think, from some institutional investors that are here. And another theme that I'm sensing, I don't know how you guys are seeing it, but that whole exploration story, you need to paint that picture, that vision for investors, and they're starting to get excited about funding exploration again.
I think that each of your individual projects are begging to be consolidated by a major like a Barrick. I don't think it's an accident that a company like Barrick or companies like Agnico are making inroads in Idaho and being as active as they're being, even in a very challenging market. I'd love for each of you to tell me what you're doing to advance your project and kind of where the projects are at this point in time.
Sure. Our project, the Stibnite Gold Project in central Idaho, we're in the process of completing a feasibility study. We have a pre-feasibility study already out. Feasibility should be out in the first half of next year. In parallel with that, we're permitting the project for development, and it'll be a very large-scale mine, so it's a long-term process, but we should be through that permitting process in early 2020. So the project's moving forward, and it really is a reflection of the need of the majors for additional supply. Everybody's had a tough time in this industry for an extended period, and one of the key things or typical things that happens in those cycles is the majors stop spending money on exploration. And that saves them money, it gives them more profits, or keeps them barely profitable or whatever in that interim period, but obviously it hurts the pipeline down the road. And I think what you're seeing, is perhaps a smarter approach by the majors. Before, in the last cycle, they tended to jump in early, often too early, and then find out the project wasn't really what they wanted, and now you got an orphan project internally in the company, and they try and get rid of it later or whatever. I think now what they're doing is they're taking these toehold positions in companies, and it gives them the ability to expose themselves to a variety of different projects, and keep their finger on the pulse. They can help advance the project, which certainly Barrick's doing with us, giving the benefit of their advice and experience, and that helps move it forward more expeditiously. And then they'll get to the end of that process. At some point, they'll assess, is this something they want to go to a different relationship with, or are they satisfied and somebody else steps in, or does the company move it on its own? But I think it's a trend across the industry that you're seeing that a substantial amount of the money going into the exploration / early stage development projects is coming from strategics now. It's not coming from investors. And that's really a reflection of what they need in the future.
Excellent. Hugh, it's an exciting time at Revival. You have rigs turning. You're as efficient as anyone in the business. Tell me a bit about Bear Track and a little bit about Arnett Creek as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, first on the environment. I feel like this is the Cleveland Browns, 19 games of losses, and we're just about to turn the corner here.
They won recently, by the way.
Yeah,
so
exactly. So this is my point. And so I think we're at the start of something that's going to happen in the industry where we recognize this gap, this huge gap between the pace of production and the pace of discovery that Steve's talking about, and the industry wakes up to that and has to address it. And some of these companies are preparing for that. They're meeting with companies like ours. They're making strategic investments. They're getting smart in new jurisdictions like Idaho, and that's good for businesses like ours and for our investors. Bear Track is a brownfield site. We have the benefit of lots of expertise on that site. We're drilling right now. We've been putting out some pretty impressive results over a 5-kilometer trend of mineralization at Bear Track. It's at that exciting phase of exploration discovery, and it's really, there's lots going on with processing of geophysics, with structural work, with bringing folks out to site to help with the geological understanding. And also as we build out the company's talent and team, we've got a super chairman in Diane Garrett, who's done it before on the Hale project in the Carolinas, well known to U.S. retail investors. And we continue to build on those people and on the expertise and the talent and the understanding of the project. It's an exciting time. Our longer-term ambitions as a company are to address that gap between the pace of production and the pace of discovery, and to deliver cash to our investors. So we actually want to take our project into production. We've got the two paths we're following. One would be a restart of the leach operation at Bear Track. And the second would be to develop out a larger mill concept around the big resource there. So lots for us on our plate, and an exciting time of growth for our shareholders.
Craig, you mentioned the need for exploration companies to paint a picture of how they're adding ounces, and you were recently granted some very important permits, some milestone permits for Otis Gold that are really going to allow you to expand and address the scale of your land package and what that offers. Can you talk a bit about those permits and what it will allow you to do and how you're approaching that?
Sure, I can. I would like to say I'm not quite as optimistic as Hugh, and I'm not prepared to compare myself with the Cleveland Browns yet. I'll wait and see how they do next Sunday.
All right.
Okay, and then we can revisit that storyline. But yeah, we've got a 12,000 acre package at Kilgore. We've got a two-pronged approach to developing that. Number one is taking the existing Kilgore deposit, which is 950,000 ounces. It remains open in three directions, to the north, the south, and to the west. And so we want to, our initial phase, or our next phase of drilling, is going to be to expand the near surface heap leach deposit that we see at Kilgore. And the second thing that we're doing is the regional expansion. And we've got a number of different targets out there: Prospect Ridge, Gold Ridge, Dogbone Ridge, and something called Gold Knob. And for the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to be focusing on doing the groundwork that's required to develop very specific high priority targets at those emerging targets. And we are now permitted to go and start drilling at Prospect Ridge, at Gold Ridge, and at Dogbone Ridge. And that's been a big change for Otis, and I can't kind of underplay how important that's been, because it's been very frustrating to be able to only drill on a very small footprint with no real step outs at the Kilgore deposit. And now we're in a position where we can, with the right funding, go and start aggressively expanding the gold resource out at Kilgore. So it is an exciting time.
Excellent. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. It's a tough market. Any last words for investors or speculators that have bought Midas, have bought Revival, have bought into Otis, and are looking at their shares, and they look at their portfolio, and there's a couple of up days, and then there's 3 down days, and kind of a sideways pattern? What would you say to people that are watching and listening?
Well, thanks, Gerardo. I mean, I think the key to this industry is patience and persistence. The cycles can be frustrating and challenging, and my portfolio is not pretty, but these cycles turn, and they always turn, and they always turn when it seems like it's the bleakest. And it looks like, oh, this is awful, and it's going to all be over. And then you get these turnarounds, and then that's when the rewards are reaped from a significant uptick in value. And you've got the underlying fundamentals, as Hugh's talked about, just the lack of supply coming online. This has to be addressed, and it can only be addressed by new projects like ours coming along, and that is where the value opportunities will be created. Well said. Hugh?
The S&P is at an all-time high. The Dow is at an all-time high. You've got the FANG stocks that are in the trillions in market cap. It's an unbelievable state of affairs, but it's not unprecedented, right? Remember 2000, the same thing happened with the dot-com bloom, and it took a couple of years for folks to see that there was over-exuberance in the space, and of course what followed was a 5 or 6 year run in commodities. And I think when folks, generalist investors, start to recognize that those iPhones that are being sold by Apple and the materials and the goods that are being sold by Amazon actually have to come from the ground and come from miners, explorationists like us, they will come back to this sector. And the short positions and the underweighting in this sector will be reversed. And for investors today, I'd say, hang with your positions, add to them where you see opportunity to add good companies like Midas and Otis and even Revival Gold, and be patient. The cycle will turn, and good companies will prosper and deliver value for their shareholders.
Thank you. Craig?
Well, I suppose if it's true that your portfolio goes up one day and then down 3 days, I would tell your investor to look at their portfolios every 4 days. That would be the simple approach. But like these guys, I mean, it's kind of like a spring being loaded, and the longer we go into this bear market, that spring just gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And when things do turn, and they can turn very, very quickly with very little advance warning, it can move very quickly upwards. And investors need to be in that market because it's very hard to chase stocks when they start moving. So certainly when guys are down, if you like a story and you share the vision of the management team and the board, then now's the time to start building a position in these things so you can capitalize on an uptick in the market. And we know that's coming.
Yeah.
Stephen, Hugh, Craig, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Thanks, Gerardo. Appreciate it.